Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us in our ERIC conference along with the Tees Valley Wildlife Recorders, and just to help us celebrate Eric's 10th birthday this year. Well, this is the first of our talks in our little sort of extended conference over November, and we're delighted to have Steve Lowe with us talking about Atkinson's remarkable tree survey. So really, without any further ado, I'm just going to Steve and we'll hear what he's got to say. I'm looking forward to it. So Steve, hello there.
Hiya.
How are you doing?
I'm all right, yes. Getting used to the new situations. Good. This is a bit of an experiment for us both, I'm sure. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, hopefully it's all fine. So Steve, I don't know if you could just start by maybe just telling us a little bit about your who you are and your background. And if you want to just start sharing your screen when you're ready, and I'll let you get on with it. So if you can just introduce yourself a wee bit, please, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, welcome everybody. Happy birthday, Eric. And I'm Steve Lowe. I am the chair of the ERIC Management Board. I've actually, sorry, I'm gonna have to do that again, aren't I? Got a frog in my throat straight away. Sorry, my name's Steve Lowe. I'm currently chair of the ERIC Management Board. I've been a long-time supporter of wildlife recording since I started working with initially with Durham Wildlife Trust, and then latterly with the Northumberland Wildlife Trust as head of conservation. I now work with Northumberland Rivers Trust. I'm a freelance ecologist. I do work on crayfish and rivers, and I'm also a heritage consultant as well. So a bit of a change there, do archaeology, etc. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to do this talk. This is something I've been interested in for a long time, and I think it mixes both my interest in history and my interest in wildlife by doing Atkinson's tree survey. So I'll just share the screen, which is this is the moment of truth.
And I'm just going to switch off my video and mute myself so that we can just concentrate on you, Steve. So
no problem. Yeah. If the technology works, that's it. Okay, right.
Yep,
well,
that looks good, Steve. It's all working, I think. So, thanks.
Great. Well, this is a talk that I prepared a while ago on Atkinson's remarkable tree survey of 1873 and 1876. You wouldn't be surprised to know I wasn't actually alive then, but you know, it's something that's fascinated me since I first heard about it. And I prepared this talk for the Wildlife Trust, and so I've kept the backgrounds there just to benefit them. If you're not a member of your Wildlife Trust, then you really should be. Here we go then. So what I'd like to do today is to talk about George Clayton Atkinson himself. Talk a little bit about his life, and then to talk about the remarkable tree survey. And then I just want to reflect really on the relevance of this particular work on sort of the modern day, really, because I believe, well, I won't tell you what I believe now. I'll tell you later. So George Clayton Atkinson, this is the man himself. He was born in Newcastle on the 5th of April 1808 in Westcott Street, and his father, Matthew Atkinson, was part of quite a big landowning family at the time, the Temple Sowerbys, and married into that family. And his mother was similarly from a large landowning fraternity, but from Cumbria. But the thing was, in that time, quite a lot of families were very close-knit because of marriage and associations. So, and out of those sort of communities, we did get things like the Society of Antiquities and the Natural History Society of Northumbria. So he was part of that group, if you like. In fact, he was actually one of the founder members of the Natural History Society of Northumbria, although he's probably one of the lesser known ones for many reasons. He became president of the Tyneside Naturalist Field Club. And then, not saying that this was remotely associated with that, but his death was in 1877 on the 14th of April. And he's actually buried in Jesmond Cemetery, and his gravestone is still available to view if people wanted to go and have a look. So a bit about his background. The family, as I said previously, were wealthy, and he actually had a good life. You know, quite well to do, and particularly at a time when, you know, there was a lot of poverty around. And he gained quite a lot of his early interest in natural history on the banks of the Tyne, where his family moved at one point to Ovington, and following that move, he became very good friends with Thomas Bewick, you know, who was obviously the well-known local engraver. So there's Thomas Bewick. Bewick's life was 1753 to 1828, and he really had a massive impact on the public accessibility and recording of wildlife. And it was quite interesting, really, that the two of them got together, because there was a vast difference in their age. Bewick, of course, very famous for his illustrations in the natural history of quadrupeds. And again, you know, once the museums are back open, there's a really nice little gallery in the museum about Thomas Bewick, and he is really a local hero. But as I said before, there was quite a gap in the ages between these two, and Bewick really though took him under his wing and acted as a bit of a mentor for him. And in fact, Atkinson became Bewick's biographer once he died. So, you know, those links carried on, really. Atkinson was actually the first curator of ornithology at the Hancock Museum. I still call it the Hancock, by the way, not the Great North Museum. I know I'm very naughty, but, you know, traditions die hard. And a number of his own specimens actually became the early core of the Natural History Society collections. The other thing with Atkinson, which is actually really quite interesting, is that he became very well travelled. He undertook a number of expeditions to places like the Hebrides and St Kilda. And in particular, there's a book that he produced where they took a trip to the Faroes in Iceland in 1833 with Dick Clayton, Atkinson, and William Train. Now, that book is still in print, and I've been looking for it for absolutely ages, and bumped into it in a shop in the Hebrides. Well, that was a surprise, really, but it just jumped out at me on the shelf, and I had to buy it. In other parts of his life, though, he was actually very socially active, and he became Sheriff of Newcastle and a Justice of the Peace. But he said himself that he just found public life distasteful. So I don't know whether this was a rite of passage or something, because quite a lot of eminent naturalists seem to have gone through a similar route. But he's, what I think probably most significant now is what happened in his work life, where he worked as a merchant and became one of the directors of the Newcastle and Carlisle Railway. And as a result of that, he obtained interests in iron, and he set up the Leamington Iron Works. So here we have an industrialist who is also, you know, interested in wildlife and the environment. So, but I'm not going to quite paint the picture that people might think I will with him until later. This is his trip to St Kilda. Shows you some of the, he wasn't an accomplished artist as such, but he did some good records. So A number of these are in his book. And this is what this is one of the accommodations on St Kilda, place I've always wanted to go, and somewhere where they said that residents of St Kilda had one leg longer than the other because the slope was so big that one leg adapted to being shorter than the other. I can't believe that's true, because I don't think we would have got back down in the opposite direction if that had been the case. But anyway, so this is you know, what are still on the island itself. So it shows you he did actually take quite good records of this, and they're still intact. So just going back to his work, and this is a picture, a contemporary picture of the Leamington Ironworks. And my first impression of it when you look at it is, you know, oh my God, that's hell. You know, at the time, the environment was not really on anybody's mind. There had been earlier attempts at environmental work through, particularly in London, where a number of local landowners and naturalists actually became worried about the effect on human health of having things like graves and stuff like that in town. And that had been a movement to do some town planning then, but that was like 2 centuries before this, and nothing had really massively changed. And Newcastle, as we all know, was a powerhouse of the Industrial Revolution, producing coal and other materials for shipbuilding, for you know, armaments and things like this. So it was a very important place. But you know, as I say, if this was a coloured picture, this would look like a scene out of hell. And atmospheric pollution was actually quite rife at the time. And this is a picture by Turner of the Houses of Parliament. It's and you know, obviously we now have a rose-coloured tinted view of this, but you know, this just shows you that it was as bad in the past. But it's you know, the miasma of fogs and things like that in London was really quite notable, and people were starting to get worried about pollution. But what actually drove change in atmospheric pollution wasn't really health, which is a surprise to most of us. It was the fact that people started to ask for compensation as a result of their effects on their own businesses. And one of these led to a parliamentary inquiry into the state of large towns, which were described as several nuisances. Atmospheric pollution was one of several nuisances, like the language. An industrial Tyneside, again, just reviewing that really, you know, this is an etching of an industrial Tyneside, and you can see there that you've got dwelling places on top of factories and railways, etc., etc. And it was quite a concentrated area, and the vast majority of people who lived in those areas were living in slum conditions, and were working in some of these factories. And again, you know, we've got a picture here of Turner on Tyneside, and you know, again, a similar sort of I don't know, biblical view almost. If you look at it, you can quite clearly make out some of the landmarks in here, like the cathedral, the castle, and on the left-hand side of the picture, you can see Windmill Hills and Gateshead, which is important because it comes up in the story later on. So Atkinson's involvement in natural history, well, they fluctuated through his life. And in his last 15 years of life, he really had almost a complete withdrawal from contributing to natural history. Until he started to have a revived interest in meteorology. Now, I think this was probably spurred on because a number of his contemporaries, like John Hancock and Hewitson and Alder, they actually were known as preeminent in their fields, and they still are regarded as incredibly important. And perhaps Clayton Atkinson had a sense of underachievement as a result of that. And his foray into meteorology was quite interesting. he realized that meteorology was actually sensitized to environmental change, where you got a lot of what we would call pollution. Then there would be different environmental conditions in place. And he started to realize that some of this was down to industrial processes. And he actually particularly noted a change arising from the chemical industry. We don't think of Newcastle as a chemical industry, but there are loads and loads of places along the Tyne where this was actually the case. Friars Green, I think it's called, in Gateshead and various other places. There were actually, lots of chemical factories in the Tyne. And again, just a few images of these. These are the blast works, the smelter works, just to illustrate this again. I'm trying to paint a really bleak picture here, as you can probably realise. We had Armstrong's works, etc., and the big, iron works, and then there's Leamington glass works and all this stuff. So all of this is producing smoke and pollution, etc., etc. In 1860, this industry was at its all-time peak in Newcastle. It didn't really get much bigger than that. And Atkinson started to make a pioneering contribution because he looked at smoke processing. Not that this has got much to do with natural history, by the way, but he was looking to try and eliminate the worst effects of smoke pollution. And in fact, his factory in Leamington became a model. What was the driver for that, though? Because it wasn't really reflected anywhere else. On his outgoing speech as president of the Natural History Society, he was describing some of this work as an industrial scandal, which, as an industrialist himself, is actually quite a bold claim. And the reason why he started this interest in meteorology actually became part of his natural history thinking was he realized that if you started to look at trees, you could monitor the effects of these processes because trees lived longer than humans. Actually, I have to say that in those days, getting to the age of 40 was pretty remarkable, given the effects of the pollution. And as a result of that, there was no point in looking at individuals. And Atkinson realized that if you started to look at trees, you could monitor the effect of these processes over a longer period of time. As I say, they have a long lifespan, they certainly outlive us, and therefore it could be something that could be studied and could carry on into the future. Now, his remarkable tree survey took 5 years to complete. If complete it did. We'll reflect on that in a moment. He looked at 250 trees. In fact, actually, it wasn't just Atkinson that did this. He lassoed in and pulled in all of his contemporaries who had estates, etc., to look at what they called remarkable trees. The word remarkable in this context probably meant mature trees. So it's a little bit like our work that we've tried to do over the last few years, looking at ancient trees and veteran trees. And the interesting thing here is that his results, although they were pivotal, they actually didn't really become notable in terms of their impact until after he died, which is quite often the case. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that we put Atkinson here as a contemporary of Jimi Hendrix or anything like that, but Hendrix's fame, as an example, got much higher after his death. I think that's often the case. So everyone will love me once I've gone. Here's just a reflection in a minute. If we were to design a self-generating product that had to have these key functions, to provide homes and shelter for man and animals, to provide places to play, to combat climate change, alleviate flooding, reoxygenate air, stabilize soils, reduce noise, produce food and fuel, then we would actually be planting trees, wouldn't we? Which is exactly what we're trying to do now as a way of addressing carbon capture. So just go back to the survey, and apologies for a slight deviation there. The definition in Atkinson's report are trees that are of interest biologically, culturally or aesthetically because of their age, size and condition, which is actually what we use as a way of describing ancient woodland. And so that people sort of get a view of what it takes for a tree to become old. In relation to oak, for instance, it's taken that any trees with a diameter of more than 1 meter are actually potentially interesting from a veteran point of view. 1.5 meters are valuable in terms of their conservation value, and a true meter tree is truly ancient. We're actually talking about the diameter here, and instead of using that meter, I use the hug measure. In that, if you can get your arms around a tree and tightly around a tree and hug it, then it's actually quite an interesting one. If you can't quite do that, then it's valuable. And if it takes two of you to hug around a tree, then actually that's an ancient tree. So this is probably where the term tree huggers came from. I don't know, I made it up. Veteran trees are really quite important from an ecological point of view, and they're often overlooked because these can be single trees, and they provide a huge range of features. Not just the tree itself, but it provides dead wood, aerial roots, holes in branches for nesting. You get fungi on it, lots and lots of different nooks and crannies for wildlife. And there are a number of specialist species that actually survive on veteran trees. I'm not talking about veteran ancient woodland here, I'm talking about veteran trees, because most of Atkinson's work was looking at these. But they're vital for a number of species, such as bats, woodpeckers, beetles. We don't get stag beetles up here, unfortunately, but that would be brilliant, wouldn't it? Butterflies, obviously, as well, birds, and other mammals like dormouse. So ancient woodland, ancient trees, really valuable habitat. So I'm just going to go now on to the remarkable tree survey itself and give you some descriptions, some photographs and some descriptions of the survey that Atkinson undertook and coordinated. Before I do that, I just want to emphasize again that I'll just review the fact that I don't think it was particularly comprehensive, although at the time it was considered to be. But in reality, he probably only got the places that of people that he knew who owned them. He didn't go out looking for sites. It basically came to him, I think. But I believe this is a truly remarkable historical record, and also from an ecological point of view, really important. So here are one of his photographs, and I'm underlining the word photograph because this was 1873, and that technology, which we all take for granted, I carry it in my pocket. Every day I've got a camera in my pocket. It's called a mobile phone. I can take videos, I can do interviews, I can do all sorts of stuff. I can send a photograph of something in if I don't know what it is, and people will tell me what it is. But in 1873, photography was really, really new. And Atkinson used it for this particular purpose. And I would argue that as a result of that, this is actually one of the earliest environmental impact assessment records ever taken. That's my argument anyway. Let's see what you think by the time we come to the end. So here we have one of his images, which is a holly bush at Windmill Hills in Gateshead, which was on Turner's photograph, picture I should say, that I showed you before. You see the old windmill in the background. And this is taken in somebody's garden, Mr. Clapham, and it's actually not a very tall tree, as you can see. In fact, actually, it doesn't look particularly well in places. But it actually, not only did he record the picture, he's got people in there to give you a bit of scale, although whether they're children, it's hard to tell. Obviously, one of them plays cricket. It's said at the time, he's recorded all these other things, it's said to be 200 years old. It's a height of 4 feet, and spread of branches is 9 yards, but it's been much cut in, which means it's been trimmed back quite a bit. And then at the bottom, he says, dying from smoke and chemicals. That is, for me, is one of the really interesting parts of this particular record. Here is another one, the Tristing Oak at Alnwick Park, which is Hoon Park. And I've got to admit, I've been looking for this for ages. I've just spent some time working in Hoon Park, and I've not been able to find it. So I don't know whether it's actually disappeared or not. It's still marked on the Ordnance Survey map. But the Tristing Oak, as itself, was actually a place where people used to meet, and they used to, a dalliance might be the word that could be used, or a tryst. And as a result of that, we have people who've actually carved their name in. And this particular tree, he describes as a very remarkable tree of great age, very hollowed and much decayed, but grand and picturesque. Now, Mr. Dixon, who was chair of the Berwick Naturalist Club, or president actually, had said in 1857 that I cannot even guess its age. It must have been a great tree in 1624, as at that time it gave its name to the wood in which it stood. So that's quite interesting. So this, if it's still there, would be a very, very ancient tree. And the fact that we've got a photograph out from 1873 is really, really interesting. This is a willow tree at Morpeth Rectory, which was taken in 1873. It's not a particularly brilliant photograph, well, the photograph itself is, but they haven't reproduced particularly well. But the willow itself, you can see it's actually been pollarded and coppiced over a number of years, and the tree bole itself is absolutely huge. And we've actually got a sort of very limited amount of age on it, although Atkinson reckons it was about 80 years old, and still alive. And this is one of those where it says at Morpeth Rectory, so unless we can find out exactly where that is, it's difficult to know whether it's still there or not. And this has been one that we haven't been able to locate. However, these are two trees that actually are still there, and these are at the King and Queen Oaks, and they're at Netherwhitton, which is near Wallington, and they still do survive. Only just, I think, would be the way to describe it. And again, looking at this particular picture, they don't look in great condition at the time. And but again, you've got quite a reasonable amount of description in there. He says a handsome tree with long straight bole for half its height, beginning to decay. This is a lovely photograph in its original form. Again, it hasn't reproduced brilliantly, but it's of white poplar trees at Wylam Hall. Now, Wylam Hall is still there. And this particular tree, as I say, he describes it as a fine, healthy tree. He's got all of the measurements in there, say, that's a good record. Of course, what we don't have in any of these is the Ordnance Survey, because Ordnance Survey had just started around about that time, or was just starting around about that time, but nobody was using grid references. So one of the problems we have in trying to sort of utilize this information now is to make it relevant to current day by trying to put in a location that's actually more accurate. than this. This is another holly, which is actually taken on the lawn at Wallington. You can see Walter Trevelyan, Sir Walter Trevelyan in the foreground there. So quite a big tree. Trevelyan were the family that owned Wallington before it passed over to the National Trust. Holly on lawn, 100 yards west of the house. And that's quite a good description. It gives us the height and the girth there. And he says it's a very fine, healthy tree, handsome bushy tree sweeping down to the ground. But this, in my view, is probably the most important picture that is in the Remarkable Tree Survey. And this is a picture that's taken at Washington. And it shows quite clearly trees that have died as a result of the pollution from the nearby factory. And Atkinson, in his records, actually, he doesn't say these words exactly, but he hints at acid rain deposition. Now, again, that's 100 years before the words acid rain came into common use for describing the impacts of industrial processes. But here we have somebody in 1873 recording that on the ground and showing it very visual, a very high impact, I think, from this particular picture. So that's where the term acid rain came from, and Atkinson's work actually, he didn't coin it as such, but it refers to it. His tree survey was the climax of his own interests in the environment, and became a milestone in environmental awareness at the time. And I mentioned before the drivers for this, and I just realised really I didn't really put that in context, but Atkinson wasn't really worried about the health of his workers per se, but he was worried about the amount of time that they were taking off work because of chest conditions, etc. Which is, it makes him less of a compassionate altruist than what I might have hoped he would have been. But you've got to start somewhere, I guess. But for me, the key things within this, and not only is it an environmental awareness campaign, but it used photography, which is a totally new medium, as I said before. And what followed Atkinson's work, unfortunately after he died, were a royal commission looking at the impacts of pollution on health and the environment. There was an alkali act in at the time, and the result of this work actually meant that some of that was changed to make the environment cleaner. Newcastle became transformed as a result of these this work, and once it got into popular circulation. And we actually started to see the Green Lobby start to campaign on issues to do with the environment. The evidence in the photographs, the last one in particular, were quite stark. And when you've got a picture paints 1,000 words, that's an old saying. But I think in particular that last one really does actually show that quite clearly. And I feel that the work was actually quite modern in its concept. It sort of follows lines that are relatively familiar to a lot of us now, which is fantastic. And this is, let's not forget, this is a local guy doing something in Newcastle. So what next? Why does this matter, you might think? Oh, there, by the way, there is his Atkinsons Grave, and what a lovely tree he's next to there, a yew tree with a band on. So that's obviously quite ancient in himself. The reason I put those up though is because we were trying to push to get more records of ancient trees. In fact, it would be great if, I know Dr. Veronica Woolley started to do some of this work 15, 20 years ago. to actually revisit the sites that Atkinson had been to. And as I say, that wasn't always easy, because the locations might have disappeared or be totally inaccurate. And I do remember saying to Ronnie that, you know, we stood at one tree one day looking at this tree and saying, well, there's an even better one behind it, but it just happened to be on someone else's land, so we hadn't bothered recording it. So to say, it's only a starting point, really. But the picture on the right-hand side is actually in Ponteland, and it's on an old railway line, so we know the date of the railway line. And if you look at the you know, measuring that and recording that, then that actually you know, effectively could be exactly what Atkinson had done, but being done in the modern day. And I put the word forensics there because one of the tree species in particular that's always fascinated me and a number of other people is the black poplar. And forensics are really quite important from my point of view, because a poplar looks like a poplar, black poplar looks like a black poplar, but they're actually, you know, trying to prove that they are and where they've come from is quite difficult. And this is a tree in Atkinson, and you can see on the right there we've got a meter rule on, which I'll just point out that this is actually a meter rule from a school, so it's a traditional wooden meter rule, and I've still got one. There you go. And this is a black poplar that we didn't even know about, that was sitting in the back of the school, and we got the school children to do all of the work on this, to you know, measure it, work out its height, bit of geometry there, and also to care for it. Oops, I've lost it. Apologies. Let's go back to that slide. So yes, the reason I say forensics though is because the only way we could prove this to be black poplar was to get DNA taken from it, and it was confirmed as a black poplar, and one of probably only about 8 or 9 that we know of in the county. And interestingly, the school adopted this tree and got very campaigny when someone wanted to chop some of its branches off. And what they did was they realized that this, of course, was a dwelling place for lots of fairies and elves, and as such it should be protected. And they got in contact with the county council to look at a tree preservation order, etc., and had a really good campaign to keep this tree in situ, and it is, you know, hopefully it'll continue to be so into the future, because it is a lovely specimen of an ancient tree, and the fact that local people cared about it is absolutely fantastic. Now, I'm just going to sum up at this point. As I say, Atkinson's remarkable tree survey was, in my view, remarkable. It was probably one of the first environmental impact assessments in the country. We still have an intrinsic value that most people place on trees in general, but on particular trees. I don't think the word remarkable should just apply to all trees, though. I would guess that probably in Eric's records we have very few records of trees, and we have very few records of trees that people care about, because even a tree preservation order doesn't really protect the tree. It actually protects the look of the tree, and if you remove trees from a woodland, it can actually change what that looks like. So it's actually a little bit vague, really. You could designate a tree. It could be, you know, a site of special scientific interest, but usually that doesn't happen. But for me, the most important thing is the message that those children gave us was, this is our tree, we love it. And it would be fantastic to see a project where we could record people's favorite trees. It doesn't matter if it's native. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, particularly old. If it's got a story associated with it, then it would be really nice to know what they are. And the reason I say that is because when I was working at the Wildlife Trust, I was very aware of work going on nationally, and we were contacted by the Tree Society, who were producing a book on tree law and folk tales for the UK. And, you know, everyone had Prince Charles living up their tree, or, you know, not Prince Charles, I should say, King Charles, obviously, at the time, when he was trying to hide from the Cavaliers and the Roundheads, that type of thing. But everyone's got Robin Hood up there, and this, that, the other. But we didn't have any particular records of anything like that in this part of the world. And I'm really surprised by that, because we do have a reasonable amount of woodland and amount of trees. So it'd be great then to know what people's current remarkable trees are, to record those, to put together a contemporary record like Atkinson did, visit some of those sites and record those. But if not, then, you know, we've got a record of some trees, where they are, etc. And we should be able to do that without too much problem. And what a fantastic little project that would be to know what trees people feel are important and why they feel they're important. That's the most important. I think that's the most valuable thing to me, because if people don't care about nature, then those of us who do and are working hard to preserve it, we've got a much tougher job. So let's make it more popular and open it out to those sorts of things, in my view. And I hope that's not been too much of a ramble. I apologize if it has. It's the first time we've done this, but you know, I hope you've enjoyed it.
But no, that was interesting. It's obviously it's just interesting to look back and see someone who was just thinking differently at the time, and
yeah,
you know, waste time actually. So
yeah. Well, what I find really interesting, this side of things is really interesting for me. I attended that talk that you alerted us to with the RHS had about, I've forgotten his name now, but an Elizabethan, I think it was Elizabeth. No, it wasn't. It was slightly later than that. But he was about a gardener, basically. He was trying to protect green space in London. And at the time, London now is it's miles away from where they were trying to protect. But some of the reasons why he was doing it was fantastic. And you know, it's a contemporary sort of thing. It was a couple of hundred years before this. But then I've been involved with the William Turner group. Do you know about William Turner? Yeah, he was the first recorded herbalist produced the herbal of Northumbria. And you know, we actually found some of the sites where he used to go collecting his herbs in Morpeth, and actually got them designated so that we could, you know, so they wouldn't be lost, because they were threatened by development at the time. So it's great to actually bring some of that to life as well, you know, be able to find the sites and find some of the species that the guy was referring to, with some very flowery language as well, which, you know, very interesting, I think. So
yeah. And and just the how it's important, how I like to have the cultural links and the human links into all of that are really important, and you know, people having to care about things and have that connection.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really critical. Yeah.
Well, I think well, we might we could go on, and it's given me ideas for the future.
Yeah.
But maybe wrap things up there. And hopefully people have been, the idea, you know, what we're saying is that people, you're around while this talk's broadcast, so people have been interacting in the chat and comments, and obviously if anyone's got any more questions or wants to find out more, just in touch with us. We'll have contact details, you know, in the blurb along with this. So is there anything else you want to say, Steve, or we can finish things up there?
No, that's okay. I mean, I as we've been talking, I've got other ideas.